Hola, ¿qué tal? So we left off yesterday at Matthew 16, so we pick it up there. Verse 1. And the Pharisees and Sadducees came, and to test him, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. He answered them, When it is evening, you say, It will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be stormy today, for the sky is red and threatening. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. In Matthew 16:4, SV, what is the sign of Jonah? Matthew 16:4, Jesus mentions the sign of Jonah as the only sign that will be given to a wicked and adulterous generation. While the verse itself doesn't explain the sign in detail, Jesus provides the definition earlier in the same gospel. The definition, according to Matthew 12:40, the sign of Jonah refers to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Jesus draws a direct parallel between Jonah's experience and his own. There are two primary layers to what this sign represents. The resurrection, just as Jonah was delivered from certain death in the belly of the fish after 3 days, Jesus would be raised from the dead after 3 days. It serves as the ultimate vindication of his authority and a call to repentance. In the broader biblical context, and as mentioned in Luke 11, Jonah was assigned to the Ninevites because his presence and message led them to repent. Jesus is suggesting that his resurrection should serve as a similar, even greater catalyst for repentance. Okay, verse 5. When the disciples reached the other side, they had forgotten to bring any bread. Jesus said to them, Watch and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And they began discussing it amongst themselves, saying, We brought no bread. But Jesus, aware of this, said, O you of little faith, why are you discussing amongst yourselves the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000, and how many baskets you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000, and how many baskets you gathered? How is it that you fail to understand that I did not speak about bread? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So beware of what they can spread into your midst, all of their evil ways. Because we learned, I think it was yesterday, maybe the day before, about leaven and how, one little bit can infect the whole mound of yeast. So it's a metaphor or an analogy, one of those. Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, Who do you say that the Son of Man is? And they said, Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. He said to them, But who do you say that I am? Simon Peter replied, You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. What does that mean? What did Jesus mean in in a Matthew. Matthew 16, 18. In Matthew 16:18, Jesus says, "And I tell you, Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." This is one of the most debated and significant verses in the New Testament, as it addresses the foundation and authority of the Christian church. To understand what Jesus meant, it helps to look at the Greek wordplay, the geographical context, and the theological interpretations. The wordplay, Peter versus rock. In the original Greek, there is a specific play on words that doesn't translate perfectly into English. Peter, Petros, a masculine noun meaning a stone or a detached boulder. Rock, Petra, a feminine noun meaning a massive rock formation, bedrock, or a cliff. The interpretation debate, the person of Peter, many specifically in Roman Catholic tradition argue Jesus was naming Peter the foundation of the church, pointing to his future leadership role. That's what I always took it to mean, at least on the first read through. Peter's confession, many specifically in Protestant traditions, argue the rock is not Peter himself, but the confession Peter just made, referring to him saying, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." In this view, the church is built on the truth of who Jesus is. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. Okay. Hard to say. Jesus himself, some argue that Jesus was pointing to himself as the chief cornerstone, which is a common theme in 1 Peter and Ephesians. Then there's the location, Caesarea Philippi. Jesus spoke these words while standing at the foot of Mount Hermon in Caesarea Philippi. This location was famous for a massive rock wall containing a cave known as the Grotto of Pan. The Grotto of Pan. Grotto of Pan. Oh. Okay. Whoops. In the ancient world, this cave was colloquially called the Gates of Hades because it was believed to be an entrance to the underworld. By choosing this backdrop, Jesus was likely using a visual aid. He was essentially saying, even here, at the supposed stronghold of death and pagan gods, my church will be established and will go on the offensive. The gates of hell shall not prevail. We often interpret prevail as a defensive term, as if the church is hiding behind a wall while hell attacks it. However, gates are a defensive structure, not an offensive weapon. The meaning, Jesus is suggesting that the church is the one on the move. The gates of hell cannot withstand the advance of the church. Victory over death. It also serves as a promise that death, Hades, will not be able to hold Jesus or his followers. The resurrection ensures the church's permanence. Okay. Where was I? Did he strictly... Oh, right. I wanted to ask about... Okay. The second part of that verse. Explain Matthew 16, 19. Matthew 16:19 is a pivotal verse in the New Testament, often discussed in the context of church authority and spiritual stewardship. To understand the verse, we have to look at the specific metaphor, the keys of the kingdom. In the ancient world, keys weren't just for opening doors, they were a symbol of authority and administration, the steward's role. This imagery draws from the Old Testament, where the king's chief steward carried the keys to the palace. The steward didn't own the house, but they had the authority to decide who entered and how the household was run. The access to truth, by giving Peter, and later the disciples, the keys, Jesus is commissioning them to open the door of the gospel to the world. Okay, here's what I wanted to see. Binding and loosing. These terms sound a bit legalistic to us today, but they were common rabbinic expressions in the first century. Binding, to forbid something or declare it obligatory. To forbid something or declare it obligatory. Loosing, to permit something or declare it not binding. To permit something. Essentially, Jesus is giving the apostles the authority to make doctrinal and disciplinary decisions for the early church. This includes interpreting how the law of Moses applies to new believers and establishing the ethical standards of the Christian community. Shall be bound in heaven. A common point of confusion is whether humans are forcing God's hand. I've never taken it that way. In the original Greek grammar, the future perfect passive, the phrasing is more accurately understood as whatever you bind on earth shall have already been bound in heaven. This suggests that the leaders of the church are not making up rules on a whim. Rather, they are acting in alignment with God's established will. They are reflecting on earth what God has already decreed in heaven. I mean, that makes sense to me. Yeah, I never took that to mean, of all things, I've never taken anything to mean that humans could force God to do anything. So that's interesting that that's a popular interpretation or a common interpretation. Anyway, verse 21. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, Far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. I like this one. I'm going to highlight that. Explain Matthew 16:23 ESV. In Matthew 16:23, Jesus delivers one of the most jarring rebukes in the New Testament. To understand why he calls his lead disciple Satan, we have to look at the immediate context. Peter had just correctly identified, Jesus as the Christ, but then immediately tried to talk him out of the suffering and death that came with that role. Get behind me, Satan. Jesus isn't saying Peter is literally the devil. Rather, he recognizes that Peter's suggestion that Jesus should avoid the cross is a direct echo of the temptations in the wilderness when Satan tried to tempt him with basically taking a shortcut to ruling the earth and not having to go through all the suffering and the crucifixion. By trying to protect Jesus from suffering, Peter was inadvertently doing the work of the adversary, Satan, by trying to divert Jesus from his divine mission. You are a hindrance to me. The Greek word used here is scandalon, which refers to a stumbling block or a trap. Peter, who was just called the rock upon which the church would be built, has shifted from being a foundation stone to a stone that trips Jesus on his way to Jerusalem. Setting your mind to, this is the core of the issue. Jesus identifies a clash of perspectives, the things of God redemption through sacrifice, the necessity of the cross, and a kingdom not of this world, the things of man, self-preservation, political power, and avoiding pain. Why the rebuke was so sharp. Peter's intentions were likely born out of love and loyalty. He didn't want his friend and master to die. However, Jesus reveals that good intentions can still be satanic if they oppose God's purpose. To Jesus, the cross was not a tragedy to be avoided, but the very reason he came. Dang. Verse 24. Then Jesus told his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." Save. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Let me save this whole one. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done. Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Save that whole chunk. That's a good one. Verse 28. Explain Matthew 16:28. Matthew 16:28 is one of the most debated and scrutinized verses in the New Testament. The core problem of the verse is chronological. Jesus tells his contemporary audience that some of them will stay alive to see him coming in his kingdom. Yet nearly 2,000 years have passed. Scholars and theologians generally offer 4 primary interpretations for what Jesus meant. So before I read this, just as a little fun study, because I've read this before, my interpretation always of this is once you're saved, like in other places, we'll read about it eventually. I think it's in the book of Acts, but it tells the story of the disciple Stephen when he's killed, and since he's saved, it refers to him as falling asleep, not as dying. And so for me, it's if you're saved, we don't actually experience death in that same way. So I think that's what the interpretation is. But let's go through them. The transfiguration, the immediate context. The most common explanation is that Jesus was referring to the transfiguration, which occurs in the very next chapter. The timing in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the statement is immediately followed by the transfiguration 6 days later. The vision, Peter, James, and John, who were standing there, witnessed Jesus in his divine glory, talking with Moses and Elijah. This served as a preview or a literal vision of his future kingly glory. The resurrection and ascension. Some argue that the coming in his kingdom refers to Jesus' victory over death and his subsequent exaltation. The power. After resurrection, Jesus declares, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." The timing. This happened within weeks or months of the statement, fitting the criteria that some present would still be alive. Oh, yeah, maybe. The destruction of Jerusalem, 70 AD. This interpretation suggests Jesus was referring to the judgment of Israel at the end of the Old Covenant system. The coming, in biblical idiom, God coming, often refers to a divine judgment on a nation, similar to language used in the Old Testament. The timing, many of the disciples were still alive in 70 AD when the temple was destroyed, marking a massive shift in the manifestation of God's spiritual kingdom through the church. Okay, maybe I'm way off. I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Oh, okay, I guess he did. Okay, so he's being specific. There's some standing here. I don't know. I mean, it's not like the AI is like the gospel truth. These are just popular interpretations. Who knows? A note on taste death. The phrase taste death is a Semitic idiom for experiencing dying. How about this? What about the interpretation that those who are saved do not die, but simply fall, as the Bible puts it? It probably has some different, it's translated to falling asleep. Maybe it means something different in Greek, as with the disciple Stephen. That is a profound theological distinction. You are touching on the New Testament shift and how it describes the death of a believer. In this view, the taste death in Matthew 16:28 isn't just about biological cessation, but about the spiritual reality of the soul. Here's how that interpretation breaks down: death versus falling asleep. In the New Testament, physical death for a believer is frequently described as falling asleep, koimao in Greek. Stephen in Acts 7, as he was being stoned, the text says he fell asleep. And also with Lazarus in the book of John, Jesus says, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go so that I may awaken him out of his sleep. The Apostle Paul, 1 Thessalonians, Paul tells the church not to grieve for those who have fallen asleep, as those who have no hope. The idea is that because Christ conquered the grave, death for a Christian is no longer a permanent tasting of the bitterness of judgment, but a temporary transition, a nap before the resurrection. The taste of death. Some interpreters argue that tasting death refers to the second death, or the spiritual separation from God. Oh, so going to hell. Truly I say to you, there's some standing here who will not taste death. It's hard to say. Under this view, Jesus is saying that those who see the Son of Man, believe in him and his kingdom, will never truly experience the sting or the flavor of death. As Jesus says in John 8:51, truly, truly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. Interesting. What are we at? 23. Okay. The Transfiguration. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. That's pretty trippy. And Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise and have no fear. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, Tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. And the disciples asked him, Then why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come? He answered, Elijah does come, and he will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, John the Baptist, but did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist. And when they came to the crowd, a man came up to him and kneeling before him said, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he has seizures and he suffers terribly, for often he falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, and they could not heal him. And Jesus answered, O faithless and twisted generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him here to me. Explain. I wonder, is he saying that because his disciples couldn't heal him, so they didn't have the faith, enough faith, I guess, to heal this person? Explain Matthew 17, ESV. In Matthew 17:17, Jesus is responding to a situation where his disciples failed to heal a boy with a demon. To understand why Jesus sounds so uncharacteristically frustrated, we have to look at the context of his mission and the specific failure of those around him. Faithless and twisted generation. Jesus isn't just venting. He is using language reminiscent of Moses in Deuteronomy 32. He is calling out a deep-seated spiritual stubbornness. Despite the miracles performed and the teachings shared, both the crowds and his own disciples were still operating out of doubt rather than a connection to God's power. Divine impatience. The questions, how long am I to be with you, and how long am I to bear with you, highlight the weight Jesus felt as he neared the end of his earthly ministry. It's a moment of profound humanity, an expression of the exhaustion that comes from constant rejection and the slow spiritual growth of his followers. The contrast of authority. Immediately after his rebuke, Jesus says, Bring him here to me. This shifts the focus from the disciples' inadequacy to his own absolute authority. He demonstrates that while faith might be lacking in the generation, it is fully present and active in him. So this is interesting because, well, for many reasons, but in another story in the book of Matthew, I think we read it yesterday, maybe the day before, he healed somebody else's child without even having to see them. He just said, go home and your daughter will be healed. I think it was a man's daughter or a woman's son, one of those. I think it was a woman's son, but I'm going to ask. Okay. In Matthew 17, why did Jesus require to see was it a son? Bring him. Yeah. See the son who was possessed, where earlier he healed somebody instantly without seeing them in person. In cases like the centurion's, that's what it was. In cases like the centurion's servant in Matthew 8 and the Syrophoenician woman's daughter, Jesus heals from a distance with a simple word. Yet in Matthew 17, he specifically commands, bring him here to me. There isn't a single official reason given in the text, sure, but scholars and theologians point to several key reasons why Jesus chose a physical encounter in this specific moment. Number one, a lesson for the disciples. The most immediate context is the failure of the disciples. They had already tried to heal the boy and failed. By saying, bring him here, Jesus creates a classroom environment. He is demonstrating the direct connection between his presence and the restoration of the boy. It serves to show the disciples exactly what they were missing, a total reliance on the authority of Christ rather than their own technique, quote unquote. Confronting the faithless generation, Jesus' frustration in verse 17 is directed at the faithless and twisted generation. By bringing the boy into the center of the crowd, the healing becomes a public testimony. Distance healings were often private signs of faith for the requester. Present healings like this one were often public rebukes to the skepticism of the religious leaders and the wavering crowd. Yeah, I forget that he was almost always followed by these big, large crowds. Okay, so that sits. Okay. Verse 18. And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the boy was healed instantly. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, "Why could we not cast it out?" And he said to them, "Because of your little faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you." Gotta hold that. Verse 22, as they were gathering, let me just read that one more time. He said to them, "Because of your little faith, for truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed," so just a tiny amount of faith, "you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you." Verse 22, as they were gathering in Galilee, Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day." And they were greatly distressed. Oh, we're at 32. Okay. We will end it there. This is a longer-ish chapter. So we'll finish up chapter 17 tomorrow. Don't forget to drop a sub. Appreciate you guys. God bless and good night.